Good afternoon, and welcome to the second in the AAAS Science and Technology Policy Fellowships live chat series. My name is Salaeha Shariff, and I am the Director of Outreach and Recruitment for the Fellowship Program, and I'll also be moderating today's chat. We are currently accepting applications for the 2018-19 fellowship year. The application deadline is November 1st. Each month during our open application cycle from May through October, the S&T Policy Fellowships will be hosting a live chat with fellows. These chats are an opportunity for you to hear from fellows of varied discipline backgrounds as well as career stages, learn more about their experience in the program, and then ask any questions that you might have. Joining us today, we have three fellows with discipline backgrounds in engineering, computer science, and math. They'll be speaking about how they've applied and translated their discipline backgrounds to policy. The S&T Policy Fellowships is where science and technology come together to change the world, and in the process, enhance and transform your career path. In this immersive policy experience, you spent a year in one of the three branches of the federal government. As a policy fellow, you're taking a step back to retool, reinvigorate, and understand how to apply your background and training to help develop and execute solutions to address today's most pressing societal challenges. And in the process, you gain hands-on policy experience and join a highly influential network of fellows. Fellows in the program and the alumni network represent a broad range of career stages and diverse disciplinary backgrounds. The fellowship program features three program areas, and you should consider applying to up to 2 of these program areas. You can learn more about each program area, including potential host offices, by clicking the Become a Fellow link on the fellowship's website. Eligibility requirements for the fellowship include holding U.S. citizenship and a doctoral degree in science or engineering. Applicants with a master's in engineering and 3 years of professional engineering experience are also eligible to apply. You should visit the fellowship's website for full details about the program areas, our eligibility, and the application process. Now I'd like to introduce the fellows joining us today. Eddie Fuller is a AAAS S&T Policy Fellow at the Department of Homeland Security. Eddie uses data sets to help identify fraud or criminal activity, border crossing, vetting of refugees, and provide support for first responders. He is a professor and chair of the Department of Mathematics at West Virginia University. Eddie holds a PhD in mathematics. Elena Zheleva is a AAAS Science and Technology Policy Fellow at the National Science Foundation, where she helps advance national initiatives in the areas of big data and data science. Following her fellowship, Elena will be joining the University of Illinois at Chicago as an assistant professor. Elena holds a PhD in computer science. Melissa Duell is a AAAS Science and Technology Policy Fellow at the U.S. Department of State in their Bureau of Conflict and Stabilization Operations. Melissa supports rigorous analysis to inform diplomats and policymakers on the questions related to conflict, including political stabilization, countering violent extremism, and electoral violence. She focuses on a variety of areas, including Latin America and the Middle East, North Africa region. Melissa holds a PhD in systems engineering with a focus on transportation projects. Thank you all for joining us today. As a reminder, this is an opportunity for you, the audience, to ask questions of all the panelists and hear from Eddie and Melissa and Elena as they discuss why they applied to the program, what the fellowship experience has been like for them, and how it's impacted their career. You can submit a question at any time by clicking in the question box and typing your question there. Please keep your question short and direct it to a particular individual or the whole panel. We will try to get to as many questions as possible today. So I'd like to begin by starting us off with a question for the entire panel. So my question for each of you is, and I think it's fair to say that the discipline backgrounds that each of you represent, math, engineering, and computer science, are often underrepresented in federal policy, and fellowship applicants of similar discipline backgrounds often have a difficult time envisioning how they would how their discipline background translates to a federal policy fellowship experience. So can each of you share why you decided to apply to the AAAS S&T Policy Fellowships? So Melissa, I'll start with you first.
Fantastic. Well, thanks, for asking me to be here, and I'm happy to answer any questions and tell you what I know, however much that may be. So I decided to apply. At the time, I was kind of headed for more of an academic career. So I was like, oh, I'm in, transportation engineering, and of course that becomes, when you're in academia, that's quite a bit more a focus than that. And I decided I wanted to look outside of academia, and this is kind of what I came across. And I'd always been interested in policy in kind of like a vague type of way, and I was always interested in communicating these technical concepts to non-technical audiences. So I had the interests. I applied, ended up getting in and started the job, and I've been really, really happy with it. Like, it turns out I definitely was wanting a much more applied type of job than what I was doing, and kind of research projects and stuff in academia. So I would say, yeah, the reason, in hindsight, the reason I applied was because I wanted to work I wanted to have work that I felt had a little bit more real world impact.
Great. And then Eddie, the same question to you. Why did you decide to apply to the fellowship program?
So I'll pick up there with the same sort of goal. I mean, being a mathematician typically means sitting in your office proving theorems, or being in a classroom kind of doing the same thing, just in different levels. But I wanted to see more impact of what I was doing, and being department chair, I've had the opportunity to work on curricular issues, programmatic issues, policy issues, mostly within the way that our department interacts with the university, but also some of the broader issues within the academic community in mathematics. And I just wanted to see how those types of things translate outward from our kind of insular sphere of mathematicians, that we tend to run into these problems articulating between the mathematics community and everybody else. And I wanted to try to see if I could play a role in that. And the fellowship opportunity kind of came up during a national meeting when I met a person who had already been a fellow once before, and she was telling me about the opportunities that she had engaged in, and it sounded appealing. I'm also kind of, in this quote-unquote mid-career process where I'm trying to figure out what's next and what the opportunities are. So it allowed me some opportunities to see what else is out there outside of academia, possibly, but I'm also working between academia and industry and government.
Great. And then Elena?
So for me, it was partly interest and partly timing. So I am very interested in questions around data privacy and how all these troves of data that are being collected by different companies are impacting our lives, and what is happening in the policy world around that in order to protect our privacy. So I studied privacy in social networks for my dissertation, and then I went to industry to work as a data scientist, where I had access to records for millions of people, and we're doing different kinds of interesting things related to recommender systems and personalizing people's experiences online. So these questions around privacy just kept on coming up from my industry experience as well, and I was very curious. So there were many questions that would come up, such as, should we be collecting this data? How should we store this data? Who should have access to that data? And so I'd always look up things online to figure out what are the guidelines, and figure that there aren't that many guidelines to start with. And I started being curious about why that is the case, what we as researchers can do about it. And so as I decided to go back to academia, I started applying for academic jobs. The fellowship came up, and for me it was an opportunity to learn more about this policy world before I go back to academia and hopefully apply some of what I learned to my own research.
Great, thank you. So one of the common questions that we always get is, what is a typical day like in the life of a fellow? So can you each speak to sort of what's a typical day like for each of you, and then also kind of expand on some of the projects that you're currently working on. So Eddie, why don't we start with you first?
Okay. My typical days are unpredictable. It's been really exciting because there are opportunities that come along quite frequently that I couldn't have predicted even a week before. we do a lot of vendor interaction. So my projects, some of which the details are kind of limited, how much I can talk about, tend to revolve around doing data analytics support for different DHS components. So as an example of that, FEMA, in its disaster response programming, we do a lot of analytics trying to figure out how to better allocate resources during the disaster response. How much water do you send to this region versus how much of the medical supplies do you send to another region? And there are a surprising number of local and state data sets that are available that help inform that process that have just never been tapped and never been utilized to improve that planning. So we work a lot with local and state agencies as well as federal agencies. And then in between that, we have a lot of vendors, Google, Twitter, Facebook, even some of the other lesser known companies will provide input into that process, trying to help us find better technology solutions. So my day can range from staff meetings where we are interacting and doing brainstorming to spending an afternoon with vendors having a discussion about certain technologies that they present. Or we just recently ran a text analytics workshop where a number of government agencies all came to our office on K Street, and we had some presenters talking about different cutting-edge text analytics methodologies. So it varies pretty widely, and there's a little bit of travel involved. So it's been very interesting and a big departure from what I'm used to in academia.
And then Melissa, what about you? What's a typical day life like at State?
Yeah, so I definitely function as an employee at the Department of State. Like it's an employee there. So I'm going to tell you a little bit more about my bureau and what we do so you can get an idea. So I'm at the Bureau of Conflict and Stabilization Operations. So the Department of State is divided into essentially you have regional bureaus, which are kind of the conduit into the embassies, that are in countries and posts and handling day-to-day political, politics and all this. And then you have functional bureaus that specialize in specific topics, and they support regional bureaus, among other things. So I'm in the Bureau of Conflict and Stabilization Operations. So we look at preventing, mitigating, anticipating violent conflict, and then stabilization issues, as I think obviously Elena said in the intro. And I'm on a small team where we do advanced analytics to answer conflict questions, essentially. So our team kind of functions as as we're very customer driven. So we find people who have, questions, diplomats generally, so it can be, ambassadors, posts, the regional desks. We work with a lot of interagency partners as well. And so I'm very much driven by projects in terms of answering, questions and producing products for clients, essentially. Of course, I can't necessarily talk about a lot of the stuff that I do. Like within the government, you can. Outside of the government, a lot of this stuff becomes a much trickier issue as to what you can share. But I think I can talk about, like, for example, yesterday, the wide variety of questions I was asked, looking at some Venezuela issues, Guatemala. We've been looking. That one's public, so we've been looking at conflict drivers in Guatemala. And what drives also migration rates and big land disputes was the question. Looking at some stabilization assistance. So, and all of this, I'm trying to answer it with, data sets essentially, but we generally have to kind of find them ourselves. So figuring out a way to answer difficult conflict questions using quantitative methods is quite fun. I was also been teaching some program design stuff. So what was the best way to, design an assistance program? I was asked about Kurdish issues, which is a tough one for me. I'm not an expert in that, or really anything to do with foreign policy, but I'm learning a lot. Conflict in Syria. Cyber conflict was last week. There was another paper that we went over for that. I'm talking a little bit about disinformation, some policy stuff. So I'm a typical day is kind of management. Of course, we're in the State Department, the Department of State. Like we have a lot of meetings. It's kind of what we do. It's kind of what diplomacy is. So there tend to be meetings, figuring out what products are due. I don't do quite as much of the Department of State can be quite paper driven, so you're writing notes and memos and things. I do some of that. I consult with the teams. We finish products. We brief products.
Great. And then Elena?
I was thinking about, like, is there like a typical day actually, but I guess there are certain typical activities that you can expect if you're a fellow at NSF. So I'm at the National Science Foundation, and specifically I'm in the Directorate for Computer and Information Science and Engineering, and I work on different data science initiatives there. So what that means is that some of those initiatives are internal to NSF initiatives, whether it's about programs that NSF has, such as the Big Data program, or planning activities for future programs. Some of the activities are external, so there are interagency activities that NSF participates in, such as the Big Data Interagency Working Group, and also the Data Cabinet, which is I wouldn't call it exactly grassroots, but it's basically something like it's an organization across different agencies that brings together different data chief data officers and data scientists across the government to talk about the issues that the government is facing and how there could be more data-driven solutions to those issues. And then NSF also works very closely with the research community and the academic community. So some of the initiatives I'm involved in are workshops and meetings. So my typical day involves meetings and writing emails to coordinate some of these initiatives, plan for future initiatives, put together documents that are necessary. But I also wanted to mention that as a fellow, we also have flexibility to do things that are outside of our agencies. So I've taken that as a professional development opportunity for myself. So some days I'm at the national academies and I listen to different study results, such as privacy of employees, or I'm at congressional hearing that talks about the dawn of AI and how policy is going to be shaped around artificial intelligence. So, so those are not exactly the typical days, but they also happen fairly often.
So I think it's probably safe to say that there is no typical day in the life of a AAAS S&T policy fellow. So for those of you that have joined us on the chat, please go ahead and submit your questions. This is now your opportunity to ask Melissa and Elena any questions about their experience or about the application process or the selection and interview process related to the fellowship program. And while we're waiting for some questions to come in, I'm going to go ahead and go through some of the advanced questions that we received for this chat. So the next question that I have for each of you is, what is the most important or valuable thing you have done or learned during your time as a fellow? So Melissa, why don't we start with you first? Most important thing you've done or learned as a fellow?
Okay, so there's a lot of things that I've definitely learned, and a lot of it is really dependent on what you want to do. So that's, I mean, one of the great things about the fellowship is you're exposed to so many different people, especially within the fellow network, and everyone is, you know, has different goals and that sort of thing. So my answer is, you know, what's most interesting to me. So I was always, I think, interested in, you know, in academia we had this idea like, oh, we're going to inform policy with our research questions. So we had this idea, but it was always a very nebulous thing about how that actually happens. Especially with, you know, more kind of quantitative approaches. And then I went into like international relations, which is like not really an environment where they or traditionally use a lot of data-driven, evidence-based quantitative methods. So probably the biggest thing that I've learned in terms of kind of what I'm interested in, I would say is like how you communicate results of using kind of data methods to decision makers and to policy makers, and how that actually happens. And the way that actually happens is you have to know the right thing at the right moment when you're near a policymaker. So it's quite challenging, which is not necessarily like hugely insightful or anything, but it's very difficult. It's all about being able to say things and like really you have to tell them how it's important to them, how it's solving their problems, which again, not terribly insightful, but I'm getting a lot of practice with that, so that's been good.
And then Eddie, what about you? So the most important thing you've done or learned?
I think it's ongoing, so I'm not sure if there is going to be an important one, but the most important one. But I'll go two different directions. On the one hand, sort of echo the notion that just the number of people that I've met and getting some insight into not only the way that the federal government, so the executive branch is where I'm posted, and I've certainly had a lot of interactions with different levels of the hierarchy in federal, the executive branch, but in the congressional branch, I mean, the legislative people have a different mindset and a different way of looking at things, and trying to figure out how to communicate with that and provide information into that environment at the right times and the right places. I'll echo that notion. You have to know the information beforehand, because that moment may come up and you just don't know when it's going to come up, and then you're the person who has an opportunity to turn a lever a little bit one way or the other in some decision-making process. More specifically for me, just the ability to sit down, take some time, learn some high-end tools. I've been involved in trying to move a lot of our data analytics technology to the cloud, and so getting some insight into how cloud technology is becoming the thing, and everybody is trying to figure out how to adapt to that, and how the machine learning stuff that I thought was just kind of cool a few years ago is now becoming everybody's next big thing. So seeing how that's playing out in industry has been just really pretty amazing, to be honest.
Right. And then Elena?
So I think for me the most important thing was to be able to have this bird's eye view over what is happening with data science. So I had like my siloed views from academia and from industry. Well, I don't know if they're siloed, but there was a specific view on things. And being at the National Science Foundation helped me see what is actually happening across the country, and what roles Congress and different nonprofits and national academies, how different government agencies play a role in this, what is happening around data science education, and what kind of work is being done around that. So for me, that was invaluable. I'm not sure I would have been able to get that kind of view anywhere else. That's one. And then the other one that was not so much a takeaway that I need to take somewhere, but it was really nice for me to see how passionate people are at NSF and how much they care to actually find money for academics to do their research. Because being outside NSF, I've always heard like, oh, it's super hard to get grants from NSF. Well, it's super hard because NSF has a relatively small budget to start with, but they are people that are working really hard to actually help researchers. So that was very nice to see.
Yeah, I would echo that as well. That's something it's interesting to see. Outside of the government is a huge bureaucracy. It can be such a black hole, but being here, it's great to see how passionate and how hard people are really working to do whatever it is that they're trying to do. But that's a nice thing to see as well.
Right, yeah, I get that sort of insider perspective. So we just received a question from Eric, and Eric is wondering, he's sort of having a difficulty understanding how he would translate his background in biology to the world of policy. So his question for everyone on this panel is, did you have an idea of how you would use your academic expertise when you were applying for the fellowship, and how is it different from how you actually are using it? So sort of what was your thought process prior to the fellowship, and then how are you using your discipline background in your fellowship program? So
yeah.
Oh, sorry, Melissa? Yeah.
Sure, I can keep talking. So I guess I should also make this clear, like I changed fields. So I am really not doing civil engineering anymore. So the part of my background that was useful was I did all this kind of the modeling and the quantitative methods, and so I have an operations research background and a systems background. I actually don't usually tell people transportation because that's like, it just doesn't make any sense where I am. So I frame my background based on who I'm talking to. So I would say for me, a lot of it is like, the stuff part of my background that I use is like just being able to understand data and like being able to the modeling stuff is useful because we're kind of trying to get into that sort of field. But where I am, we're really deadline tasker driven. So I'm not really developing new models or new techniques or doing novel work. I'm trying to figure out what is the fastest way I can answer this question, so that I have an answer by like 4 o'clock today, because people need answers. So I would say that like my exact discipline background, I'm not using it. But I chose, like, that was kind of what I wanted. I'm happy with that decision. But yeah, it's definitely the training and kind of just the experience. Teaching has been helpful, giving presentations, interacting with people, like all those soft skills that they talk about. That's all been very useful.
Right, so very much this concept of transferable skills. So Eddie, what about you? So pre-fellowship, how did you think you would be applying your background to your fellowship placement, and how are you actually applying your background to your placement?
So I think going into it, I really had a notion that I would be trying to do something different. So I actively sought out different opportunities that were a little bit outside of my comfort zone. The NSF was a big draw for me, but I felt like I kind of knew those folks in terms of my academic soft skills, if that makes any sense, because I interact with people in the NSF and the NIH a little over the years on a regular basis. So I don't, you know, in terms of your background, it can really not matter, and it can really matter. I've met fellows who are doing stuff that's right in the wheelhouse of their PhD or close to it, has some content expertise that they're bringing to bear on problems on a regular basis, and providing that same feedback that Melissa is talking about to decision makers. But I've met people who have, you know, a PhD in nuclear engineering who are providing some completely different support for a congressional staffing office. And I think it really depends on your ability to take that knowledge synthesis capacity that you developed while you're getting a degree and turn that to a different topic, if that's what you want to do. If you don't want to do that, if you want to find something that's biologically related, then there are plenty of there are opportunities all over the place that are connected to that. You may have to flex one way or another a little bit in terms of the specific application. So in my case, you know, I do a little bit of mathematics, but I don't do any differential geometry in my posting. I do a lot of data science and a lot of aggregate statistics, so it's a lot of statistical analyses, but on very large data sets. I do a lot of complex network analysis, but it's unlike what I was doing before for my own research. So I think you have to be a little bit flexible, but that's part of the appeal, is that there are challenges out there that you just didn't know about, and you get to solve really cool problems.
And then Elena?
So when I was applying for this fellowship, I knew what I wanted to get out of the fellowship. I wasn't sure how I can contribute. And so I took my time asking questions during the interviews with different agencies to understand what are their needs and to sort of figure out myself how I can fit and how I can help. And it's been really interesting to learn about the different needs agencies have. And especially within data science, I felt like there are 3 different types of opportunities for people with a data science background to contribute. One of them was basically being a data scientist. So partly what Eddie was describing and what Melissa was describing as well. You take some data that the agency has, and they have some question, and you help them answer that question. Another one was about really contributing to policy and not looking at data as much, sort of with your expertise. And the third one, which I just forgot, I'll come back to. But I remember that when I was bucketing all opportunities when I was interviewing in these 3 different buckets. And I didn't know these buckets before I started interviewing. It was really something that I discovered along the way. So I think that for people with let's say, biology background, that really is the opportunity to learn how you can contribute. You talk to people and figure out what you actually like and what you can be doing. And then you decide for yourself where you want to go.
Great, yeah, so the takeaway really there is the concept of that transferable skills, being flexible, and then also taking advantage of the interviews and really asking questions about what you would potentially be doing during your fellowship placement. So the next question comes from Alex, and I think it's very timely given sort of where we are at this moment. So the question is, how much of your work is influenced by the political priorities and objectives of the White House? So I don't know if there's anyone who's kind of jumping to take that one first. Maybe Melissa?
Yeah, I would think that I probably have the most politically sensitive job of the three of us, because I'm working at the Department of State. That's tough to say, because the Department of State is, of course, an executive office or an executive branch fellowship. So ultimately, the secretary determines our policy directions. They pass down their ideas to your, through the leadership to the undersecretary and the assistant secretaries and your deputy assistant secretaries, and all of that eventually trickles down to the working level, which is where I am, and you answer questions and try to contribute. So how much does the White House, if out in the world you do represent the White House and the administration, like that is our government, especially if Department of State and foreign policy. So yeah, it's there, it definitely matters. I think that I'm not necessarily, it can be, in the Department of State we don't have a lot of our political appointees. So we tend to not, right at the moment, not have a lot of policy direction. So no one's really telling us to do things differently, at least for me, in our office. Yeah. And then Elena, what about is obviously I can't say because I introduced myself as being a member of the Department of State. I can't just go say everybody within the Department of State has their personal opinions. Definitely, I'm not trying to say that they don't. But I think ultimately, it doesn't really I see the people around me and the things that the values that they have, the things that they care about, and that they're passionate about, and that, and with my bosses as well, and I'm comfortable with that. So.
And then Elena, what about you for the National Science Foundation? How does that impact you?
So I feel like NSF is a little bit at the other end of this, that they're probably a little bit less impacted by the change in government. So the main things that concerns NSF is the budget, because they're one of the agencies that has the smallest budget, and they control a lot of the basic research in the United States, or at least give a lot of the grants for basic research. So the fact that there was a 10% cut in the budget was sort of a big thing for NSF. And it's been interesting for me to see how how it has been handled, because as Melissa said, we're part of the executive branch, so it's not like NSF can take a stand on this. It's whatever budget they're told they should have, that's what they have.
And then Eddie, what about at Homeland Security?
So, I guess there are the obvious things. They tell me that we're building a wall or something, but I don't hear a lot of that. Again, there's that same layering from the secretary to the undersecretaries all the way down. In my office, so we're actually part of the Science and Technology Directorate, and I'm in what's called the Data Analytics Engine within that. Our mandate is to provide support for the components, and there are either 9, 11, or 13. I don't know. I keep counting them, and there tend to be more every time I count. So it's a very horizontal organization. So some of those are very politicized, and right now are actually seeing a lot of public scrutiny because of things like extreme vetting and the refugee crisis. So I hear stuff about that. Certainly some part of what we do is related to that, but there isn't any direction that comes to us that is politically driven. And I think that a big part of that is the fact that the people that I work with are very dedicated to doing the best that they can for the United States, for America. They want to solve problems, to make this a better place, to make us safer, and in doing so, they don't want it to be confounded by some agenda that's going to take you down to a place that it doesn't give you a good solution. I mean, everybody that I work with is really smart, and it's rare that we even really have a discussion outside of the specific technical issues that we're trying to deal with. On the other hand, you know, there are some political issues that show up, and one of them, for instance, is this notion of climate change that everyone seems to be either worried about or not worried about, and it's a national security issue, and so there are ways to look at problems that you might care about, like climate change, that have sort of a political football aspect to them, but within the context of the mission that you're trying to serve within your organization. And I think a lot of times that's the way also that we interface with the congressional fellows, is trying to figure out how to connect those dots between the two worlds. There's a big political mission in the congressional fellowship side of things, but the actual executive branch is kind of what does stuff. So figuring out how those things all fit together, and we've done a lot of stuff trying to provide interaction with those questions and to provide good answers to them. I don't really get a lot of political pressure in terms of trying to drive it to one answer or another.
Yeah, I would follow up on that and agree. And like your office, all offices have their own mission, and they're filled with, I mean, some at state, so it's, you know, foreign affairs officers, civil servants, foreign service officers, people who have been around for a lot longer and will be around for a lot longer than any particular administration. So I think people want to fulfill the mission of the office, which is ultimately U.S. national security. So.
Great. So this next question comes from Zachary, and it's kind of looking at comparing academia versus the fellowship. So the question is, what are some of the main differences between the end result of academic research, meaning talks, papers, and posters, and the kinds of reports and advice you generate as fellows? So Eddie, do you want to maybe tackle that one?
Yeah, that's been a really interesting find for me too. I mean, so for my position, I guess, like Melissa, I have the secret clearance. So there are some things that are just kind of, by definition, you know, not able to go outside the walls. But a lot of the stuff that we do is, you know, to some extent common knowledge and has led to publications for other fellows. Now, I haven't gotten to that point for myself, but there are projects that I'm working on that are informing other aspects of my ongoing research agenda from my academic appointment, and that stuff will be a part of long-term research productivity for me. So, you know, I've done reports within the organization and I've presented them internally. I would say that they are similar to an academic presentation, but the detail level is vastly different depending on the audience to which I am directing it. So I would not go into a long drawn-out discussion of mean, average, precision with lots and lots of definitions if I'm presenting to the undersecretary. But you know, if I'm presenting to a working group, I might provide a lot more detail about what's going on or something like that. I mean, the actual technical details, you have to kind of task that to the different audience that you are working with, mainly because you want to be able to connect with them, and I think that that's the big difference. In an academic presentation at a conference, I might just tell everybody what I know, and then we can have discussions if they're interested in trying to figure it out. In a presentation within the office, I have to make sure that my message is coming across and that people can connect with it and that it is relevant to them. Otherwise, I'm wasting everybody's time in some sense. So you have to really figure out how to gauge that.
And then, Elena, what about at NSF?
So I think there are a lot of opportunities to work on white papers and documents that you can co-author with others at NSF. There are some opportunities to also do research, but there are limitations in terms of what kind of data you can use. You cannot use any internal to NSF data. You can only use publicly available data. And if somebody goes into a fellowship wanting to do some research, they should clarify that from the beginning with their mentor, so that it's clear that such an opportunity exists. And when I was talking to different agencies, that was one of my interests as well. So I was asking different people what they thought about it, and some people were upfront, no, you can't publish. And then there were others, well, we're open to that. So there is, it is possible, but not everywhere, and not with all kinds of data.
And then Melissa?
Okay, so I think the question was, what is the difference between like the things you produce in academia versus what I'm doing now?
Right.
I mean, now people are actually using it, actually answering questions.
There is that.
Yeah, my really pithy response. I would say now, like, for one, like if I'm telling the writing something to the Secretary of State, obviously I'm not going to like see him in person, but I have actually, he has had my work on his desk. You better be really certain of that analysis. Like, you better make sure every single word and every single statement is exactly what you want to say. So if you're talking to people who actually get tons and tons of information and they need to process it and they need to actually make decisions, yeah, I mean, that's a huge difference in what you're doing versus like an academic thing. Or if you're putting in, you know, the record for, you know, the record of knowledge and publishing in a journal, it's a much different thing. So I would say, for what I do as a fellow, which again, Department of State is different from what others do, it's very much driven by like decisions. We need to make a decision now because we have these questions and we don't know what the best decision to make is. And so it's very much, things need to be operationalized. You need to tell decision makers how your information helps them make a decision.
Right. So now kind of shifting gears a little bit, we're getting some more questions now about the application, selection, and interview process. So the question comes from Dan is, could you briefly explain the application process, including interview references and statements? So I'm going to answer that really quickly, and then I'll have the fellows kind of chime in with some of their advice. So Dan, in terms of the way the application process works is if it's an online application that you need to submit by our application deadline of November 1st. So if you go to our website, there's a link to our application portal, which also has an extensive FAQ document in terms of everything that you need to submit. So once you've submitted your application, all applications are reviewed by alumni of the fellowship program. Depending on the score that your application has received, your application then gets forwarded onto a selection committee. The selection committee then determines who they would like to invite for a 30-minute video interview. And if you make it to the last stage of the selection process, you come to DC, you spend a week in DC, and you're essentially running around and interviewing with the various agencies that are interested in having you come on board for the year. It's an opportunity for you to better understand what you'd potentially be doing at the agency, as well as for the agency to see if you would be a good fit for the fellowship placement. And then in May or June, you're given an offer letter, so it provides you with details related to your placement office. And then the fellowship year begins the following, begins that September, and then it runs through the following August. So it's September 1st through August 31st. It is a year-long commitment, and you would need to relocate to Washington, D.C. for the duration of your fellowship year. So with that, it's sort of that quick overview, and I don't know if any of the fellows, if there's anything else you wanted to add to that, or maybe if you could speak a little bit in terms of how to draft a competitive application. So what advice or recommendations do you have for the audience? So Eddie, perhaps we'll start with you. What advice would you give to people in terms of drafting a competitive application?
I think that you really have to evaluate the different areas and find one that resonates with you, because if you find an area, a fellowship area that kind of connects with you, then writing the one-page briefing, I mean, I won't say it comes naturally or easy, because it takes a little bit of work to put together and to figure out how to do that, especially if you're used to, like me, writing an academic paper that could be 12 pages long. Writing a briefing is a very different exercise, but figuring out how to communicate your ideas to somebody within a very short span is a good exercise for any of us in academia, and I think that ultimately that's one of the benefits of the fellowship program is getting people to think about how to convey the things that you think are valuable and important to them in a way that resonates with them and that they will understand, even if they're not an expert in your field. And that's the best advice I could probably give to you, is to try to create a briefing or the documents or a presentation that is convincing and engaging to somebody who doesn't really know that much about your area or what you're writing on, because that's the audience. You're trying to convince somebody that something is important and they may not know a whole lot about that area. What are the pieces of information that they need to know? And then, finding good letters of recommendation, I guess, people that will say great things about you.
So just as a little bit of background, so the memo that Eddie was referring to, that is the briefing memo. So if you make it to the interview stage, that video interview, as part of your 30-minute video interview, you are going to be required to present a policy briefing memo. So about 10 days in advance of your interview, you're provided with a list of different policy topics and asked to choose one of those in which to draft your briefing memo. So Elena, what about you? Do you have any advice for drafting a competitive application?
I think like any application, it's good to be honest with yourself and with others in terms of what you're trying to get out of this fellowship. So some people are looking for a career change, other people like me are looking for to understand how policy works. So sort of try to explain that well and how that relates to your background and future goals. And I think that would make a compelling application.
And Melissa?
Yeah, I mean, I would follow up on that last point, the compelling thing. Like, a lot of, I would say, it's not the same thing. Policy is not the same thing as academia. The things that you're measured by in academia or your PhD is measures of success are not the same things that people are going to care about in, your fellowship, in the fellowship world. But the fellowship itself, the program, has a really good reputation. Generally, once people, you get in, you show that you know what you're talking about. So often, I mean, I would think for the application, like you'll have your CV and they'll have recommendations to show that you're confident. So when you're writing your essay, show that you're passionate and that you want, what are you interested in? Why are you doing this? Like, what does it mean to you? What is it that you want to change in the world?
This next question is from Alex, and it's specifically related to the placement process. So Alex asks, his question is, how much of a say did you have in your assignment? So I think by assignment he means your placement or your post office. So Elena, how much of a say did you have in that?
I was picked by my first choice, so for me it was good. So the way it works is that you specify the positions that you're interested in based on what you learned during the interview week, and likewise mentors rank the fellows that they have interviewed, and then AAAS works as a mediator to try to match these. So they try to get you the highest position you want and get the highest position for the highest ranking fellow for the mentors. So yeah.
And Melissa, Eddie, is there anything else you wanted to add to that?
Yeah, I mean, it's totally up to you. It's 100% up to you. Well, not exactly 100%, but I think that there's a lot of room for you to get out there, and so there's a whole interview week thing, and then you rank. I also got my top choice. Sorry, that is another thing. Yeah, so, but I think there's a lot of space in terms of, oh, okay, I see what that is. Phone call. I'm just gonna hang up on the person. Oops, sorry. Like, you get out there and make the case for why you want to do what you want to do and to get the interviews and stuff. I mean, no one tells you to do, you have to do this.
No, yeah. Yeah, I would just add that you have veto power, basically. I mean, you don't have to accept what's offered, and you'll get typically multiple offers, and some of that will be dependent on how well you've interviewed and how exhaustively you've engaged in that interview week process, and it can be fairly involved. So you'll get a lot of interaction, and you'll have a lot of exposure to it before you would have to make a decision. So you have a lot of, I think, control over how that goes.
So we'll end with one final question. So this question is from Zachary, and his question is specifically for those on this chat who are still in graduate school. So what advice would you all give for the sort of preparation, or what sort of preparation would you advise for current graduate students who still have a couple of years left in their program but want to enter the policy domain when they exit?
I can start on that one. So I was thinking about this since I wasn't planning 2 years or many years in advance to apply for the fellowship. So I think one thing that may help is to realize that there are different types of fellowships. There are the congressional fellowships and there are the executive branch fellowships, and also you can be sponsored by a professional society. So that I did not understand very well in advance. So it's good to talk to your professional societies and figure out, like, are they actually involved with AAAS? Do you want to potentially be sponsored by them? And also think about, like, do you really want to be part of the executive branch versus congressional branch? Talk to alumni fellows and figure out how they made their choices and what is right for you. So I think that kind of preparation can help.
And all the partner societies that Elena mentioned are on the AAAS website, so you can take a look at all of our 33 partner societies and see which ones you'd be eligible to apply for. You can simultaneously apply through the AAAS S&T Policy Fellowships as well as through one of our partner societies. And then, Eddie, what advice would you give?
So I would seek out people who are former fellows in your discipline, possibly, or related to it. Ask around at either a national meeting or within your departments. I know I've been interacting with graduate students at my home university through our Office of Graduate Education. So you might talk to someone in your Office of Graduate Education, either at the provost level or something, and see if there are programs to help you learn more about what type of policy issues institutes of higher education are interested in trying to influence. And there are a million of them. I mean, it's all over the spectrum, from funding to the way that research is conducted to how it impacts people in their states. There are congressional representatives in your state that you might even send an email to one of their staffers and ask them what kind of policy issues are important within your state. I think learning more about what that word means, policy, and then how science gets connected to policy. Those are really interesting steps that will start you on the process and open up more questions, unfortunately, but it's a fascinating journey to go on. So,
great advice. And Melissa?
Yeah, I would have to agree. Get out there and do things. People are going to want to hear your stories. You're going to have things to talk about. So I don't know, like if you work in Washington State, for example, people are going to have much different backgrounds than usually PhDs. Get out there, find something you're interested in. I think presentation skills, being able to speak about why things are important, is huge. People care a lot less. I guess if you're in graduate school, realizing that you have more options than just academia was a big one for me. I didn't really get there. There's a lot of things you can do if you want. You don't have to stay in your pigeonhole. You can, and there's a lot of great things to do there too. It's all just about what you're interested in.
What are you trying to say?
I'm just putting it out there that a lot of people have really successful, interesting careers in academia, but not everybody. Yeah, if I were still in grad school and I knew that I wanted to do this, what would I do differently? Yeah, so it's definitely being able to get more speaking experience. That's going to be really important. Write more. You probably need to do a lot of writing. Make sure you can articulate ideas clearly. Go do things that you have stories to tell.
Can I add to that write more thing? Our professional society actually has started blogs. There are two of them, in fact. The AMS and the MAA both have blogs now that graduate students would be welcome to contribute to. So that's in mathematics. You might find that there are either blogs or some other venue out there that you could connect with, and it doesn't have to be you're solving a problem. It just, I'm interested in this problem, other people are interested, and here's the state of things, and just talk about it. And I think that kind of interaction and conversation is more than welcome.
Yeah, so I'll give one last plug for the fellowship program. I think one of the greatest things, and the things I've appreciated the most, is just the other fellows. Everyone's amazing. They just do everything you can, and things you never even imagined or believe of. Everybody is fascinating, and they have these backgrounds where you do what now? And you just want to talk to everybody all day about what they do. So academia tends to not reward being well-rounded as an individual in terms of life, but I would say this fellowship is a really good place for that.
And then I'll just add two things related to that. One is on the fellowship's website, we have a resource tab that has a listing of a number of other policy fellowship opportunities, some of which you could do while you're still in graduate school. So I definitely encourage you to take a look at that. You may also want to consider the AAAS Mass Media Fellowship, which focuses specifically on science communication, and that is open to graduate students. The other resource that I'd like to share is ESEP, which is Engaging Scientists and Engineers in Policy. So if you just Google that, they have a great listing of different events and a number of different type of opportunities, including various science policy jobs as well. So with that, we're kind of coming to the end of our time here, and I wanted to thank Melissa, Elena, and Eddie for joining us today and for sharing their policy experience and insight and policy insight with us. And I wanted to thank all of you, our audience, for joining us and for all of your great questions today. If we weren't able to get to your questions, please email us at fellowships@AAAS.org. And then plan to join us on July 27th for the third chat in this series, where you'll hear from fellows with a background in the social sciences. And you can find a list of the upcoming chats in our series and all on-demand links for all previous chats on the fellowship's website. And as a reminder, we are currently accepting applications for the 2018-19 fellowship year, and the deadline to apply is November 1st. And I encourage everyone to visit the fellowship's website for information and details related to the application process, the program areas, as well as a number of different fellowship stories and how fellows are engaging in this program, as well as how it's impacting their career. And thank you everyone for joining us today, and have a wonderful rest of your day.